Nori Williamson had never been the woman someone fought for. Until a Tuesday night in her own ER when a man she'd known for 3 weeks stood in a doorway and made something very clear to the woman who raised her. She would think about it later, how quiet he was right before it happened. Not tense, not coiled. Just still. The way Mingi was always still when something had already been decided inside him and the rest of the world hadn't caught up yet. He was standing slightly in front of her, close enough that she could feel the warmth coming off his back, and she remembers thinking, even then, even in that moment, when did this become normal? Him standing between me and whatever was coming. It hadn't always been normal. 3 weeks ago, she didn't know his name. Her mother's voice came first, controlled, precise, carrying the particular weight of a woman who believed composure was the highest form of dignity. "Nori, step away from that door and come speak to me." Properly. Nori didn't move. Not because she was brave. She was so far past brave by then that she'd come out the other side into something quieter, something that had no name yet. She stood in the corridor of her own ER, her floor, her department, the one place in her life that had never asked her to be anything other than exactly what she was. And she looked at her mother and felt the ground hold steady beneath her feet for the first time in weeks. Mingi didn't turn around. He just spoke. Low, even, the way he said everything that actually mattered. "Don't touch my wife." 4 words. Her mother went completely still. The aunt beside her, always an aunt, her mother never arrived anywhere alone, made a sound that wasn't quite a word. And Nori, who had been holding herself together with discipline and habit, and the particular exhaustion of a woman who had been strong so long she forgot it was a choice, felt something in her chest come loose. Not break. Come loose. The way a knot releases when the right amount of pressure is finally applied from the right direction. He still hadn't turned around. He didn't need to. Wife. She hadn't corrected him the first time he said it either. 3 weeks earlier. The soup had gone cold before Nori remembered to eat it. It sat on the break room table exactly where she'd left it 40 minutes ago. Takeout container still sealed, plastic spoon still wrapped, because somewhere between reheating it in the microwave and sitting down, she'd been pulled back to Bay 4 and then Bay 7, and then the charge nurse needed her signature on something, and then the soup was cold and her 15 minutes were up. She ate 3 bites cold. Standing up, reading a discharge form. Then her pager went off and the soup went in the trash. Her phone sat face down beside where the container had been. She didn't need to turn it over to know. Her mother had called twice already. Today, and twice yesterday, and the day before that. 9 days of calls Nori had let ring out into silence. It was about her aunt who was sick, a family that had already decided what that meant, and a daughter who hadn't said yes yet. And the silence between them had started to feel less like space and more like something slowly hardening into a shape she wouldn't be able to undo. She went back to the floor. She was 38 minutes into a double when she noticed the man in the waiting room. Not because he was loud, he was the opposite of loud. He sat completely still in a chair by the far wall. Most people in ER waiting rooms couldn't sit still, were pacing or scrolling or talking too fast into phones. This man sat with his hands resting on his knees, watching the room with the calm of someone who had decided, a long time ago, that stillness was its own kind of authority. He was Korean, tall even sitting down, dressed simply, but the kind of simple that costs something. Beside him, a younger man held his wrist at an angle that said, fracture. The older man wasn't looking at him with worry. He was looking at him the way you look at something you are responsible for. There was a difference, and Nori noticed it the way she noticed everything on a night shift. Quickly, filed it, moved on. She went back to her chart, but she looked up once more before she could stop herself. He was already watching her. She was the one who called them back. The older man stood immediately, not aggressively, just stood, the way a large tree shifts when the wind changes. Like standing was simply the natural consequence of the younger man moving. "Family can wait. I'll stand here." Quiet. Accented. Korean American, the particular cadence of someone who learned English young but kept something of home underneath. He wasn't challenging her. He was stating a fact about himself, the way people state things they've already made peace with. Looked at him for exactly one moment. "You'll stand there," she said, pointing to a spot 2 feet back. "And you won't touch anything." Something moved across his face. Not offense, something quieter. He stepped back exactly 2 feet and said nothing. She worked on the younger man's wrist, clean fracture, not serious, and was aware the entire time of the stillness behind her. Not in a way that made her nervous, in a way she had no category for. Like being watched by someone who was actually seeing her rather than waiting for her to finish being useful. When she turned to hand the younger man his discharge papers, the older man's eyes moved from her hands to her face. She had steady hands during a shift. Always. The one part of her that never shook while she was working. He was looking at them the way someone looks at something they find worth noticing. She could not remember the last time someone had noticed something about her that wasn't a task she was performing. "He'll need a splint for 4 weeks, she said, directing it at the patient. "Ice for the first 48 hours, elevation when you sleep." The younger man nodded, signed, took the instruction sheet. "Thank you." The older man said it. Quietly, like the words meant something beyond politeness. She nodded and turned to leave. "You haven't eaten." She stopped. He was looking at her face with an expression she didn't have a word for. Not pity, not flirtation. Something more careful than either. Like he was observing something that concerned him and deciding how much of that concern it was appropriate to show a stranger. "I'm fine," she said. He looked at her with the specific patience of a man who had heard that particular sentence many times and had decided, tonight at least, not to argue with it. "Of course," he said. She went back to work, but she thought about those 2 words for the rest of the shift. Of course. And the way he'd said them, not dismissive, not convinced. Like he was giving her the kindness of not being called a liar, and they both knew it. At 3 a.m., alone in the break room, her hands finally began to shake. She looked at them for a long moment. "Hi besties, welcome to Afro-Korean series channel. It's great to have you here. Thanks for listening." He came back the next evening. Nori was at the nurse's station when she saw him, not in the waiting room this time, but standing at the front desk speaking quietly to Deja, who was nodding with the particular attentiveness she reserved for men she found compelling and insurance adjusters she was afraid of. He wasn't a patient. He had no visible reason to be there. He was holding a paper bag. Nori watched him for 3 seconds, then looked back at her chart. Her pen moved. Her eyes did not go back to him. This was a skill she had developed over years of night shifts, the ability to be aware of something without giving it the satisfaction of her full attention. Deja appeared at her elbow 30 seconds later. "That man left this for you." She set the bag down with the careful neutrality of someone who had many questions and had decided, wisely, not to ask any of them. "He described you. Said you were the nurse who treated his associate last night." Nori looked at the bag, then at Deja. "He doesn't know me." "Apparently he knows enough." Deja drifted back to her station. Nori opened the bag. Inside, a container of doenjang jjigae, fermented soybean paste soup, still warm, wrapped carefully to stay that way. Wooden chopsticks. A small folded note in handwriting that was precise without being rigid. "It reheats in 2 minutes. Eat it while it's hot this time. No name, no number." She stood at the nurse's station holding soup from a man whose name she didn't know and felt 2 things simultaneously. The instinctive wariness of a woman who had learned to ask why before she accepted anything, and hunger so immediate her body had already decided before her mind caught up. She ate it at the nurse's station, hot, all of it. She told herself it meant nothing. Then she went back to her shift, and the night closed around her the way it always did. One chart at a time, one patient at a time, forward motion as a substitute for everything else. He came back the evening after that, and the one after that. Not always with food. Sometimes he simply appeared in the waiting room, same chair, same stillness, stayed an hour and left without speaking to anyone. Once she caught him watching her through the corridor window while she worked, and when their eyes met, he didn't look away. He held her gaze with an expression that was patient and certain in equal measure, like a man who had already made a decision and was simply waiting for everything else to catch up. It should have unsettled her more than it did. On the third night, she found herself walking to the waiting room during her break without entirely planning to. She sat 2 chairs away, coffee in hand. He had nothing, just his hands on his knees, that particular stillness. "You're going to get me in trouble," she said. "No." Simple, unhesitating. "You don't know that." "I know enough." He glanced at her cup. "That's your second coffee tonight. You're counting, now. You've been here since 6 this morning." He said it without accusation, just information. The way you'd tell someone their coat was slipping off their shoulder. She looked at him for a long moment. "Why are you here?" she asked. He considered it genuinely. "You didn't eat for a full shift," he said. "Then you drove home alone at 6 in the morning." A pause. "Someone should know that's happening." The waiting room hummed around them. Down the corridor, a monitor beeped twice and went quiet. Her phone buzzed. She glanced down, her mother's name, 4th time today, and turned it face down on her knee. She wasn't fast enough. His eyes dropped to the phone, then back to her face. Something in his expression shifted, just slightly, the way light changes before a cloud fully arrives. He said nothing, but she had the distinct sense he had filed it the same careful way she filed things, and that he would not forget it. "I have to get back," she said. She stood. He didn't move to stop her. She was almost to the corridor door when he spoke. "Kim Mingi." She stopped. "My name," he said quietly. "Since you haven't asked." She had been deliberately not asking, the way you deliberately don't look too long at something you're afraid of wanting. He had noticed that too, apparently. She pushed through the door without turning around, but his name followed her back to the floor, quiet and certain. Kim Mingi. She didn't say it out loud, but somewhere around midnight between charts, she realized she'd been thinking it for 3 hours. Her mother called 7 times on Wednesday. Nori knew this because her phone showed her the number when she finally turned it face up at the end of her shift. 7 missed calls, no voicemails, which was its own kind of message. Her mother didn't leave voicemails. She considered them beneath the gravity of what she had to say. She called until someone answered, and if no one answered, she called again, and the repetition itself was the message. Nori sat in her car in the hospital parking garage for 11 minutes before starting the engine. She didn't call back. Thursday brought a different kind of pressure. Her nurse manager, Carol, stopped her in the corridor before the shift briefing with the specific energy of someone who had been asked to have a conversation she didn't particularly want to have. Administration flagged the incident report from last week, Carol said. Careful, professional. The scheduling conflict. They want to meet Friday morning, 9 o'clock. It was a miscommunication, Nori said. I covered the shift. I know. Carol's expression said she believed her. It also said belief wasn't the issue. Just be there, Nori, on time, and... She paused. There's been some talk about a man coming to the floor after hours, repeatedly. She didn't look at Nori directly when she said it. Administration hasn't raised it formally yet. I'm just telling you. Nori held Carol's gaze for a moment. Thank you, she said. She walked into the briefing and sat down and did not let her face change. Mingi was in the waiting room when her break came. She almost didn't go. She stood in the corridor for a full minute, hand on the wall, weighing it. Then she went anyway, because not going felt like a different kind of decision than she was ready to make. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway. He didn't smile. He rarely smiled, but something in his expression settled, the way a room settles when a window is finally opened. She sat 2 chairs away, the usual configuration. You're tired differently tonight, he said. She looked at him. What does that mean? Last week it was your body. Tonight it's something else. She was quiet for a moment. Outside the waiting room windows, the city moved in its usual indifferent way. Headlights, distant sirens, the ordinary business of a Thursday night. Administration wants to meet with me tomorrow, she said. 9 o'clock. He was still. There's also been some talk, she continued, about a man coming to the floor repeatedly after hours. She looked at him evenly. They haven't raised it formally yet. He absorbed this without visible reaction. Then, do you want me to stop coming? The question was direct and genuine. No performance of hurt, no pressure built into it. Just the question, laid out plainly, giving her full authority over the answer. She should have said yes. She looked at her hands in her lap instead. I have a review tomorrow. That could affect my position here, she said. I've worked this floor for 11 years. I don't have... She stopped, started again. I built this, on my own, without anyone's help. The words came out more raw than she intended. It's the one thing that has never left. The waiting room was very quiet. I know, he said. 2 words. The way he said everything that mattered, low even, without decoration. Not I understand or I'm sorry. Just, I know. Like he had been watching her long enough to have already understood this about her, and it had not changed anything about why he kept coming back. Something moved in her chest. She pressed it down. My mother, she said. The calls. She paused. My aunt is sick. My mother has decided what that means for me. Who drives her to appointments, who manages her medication, who shows up. She looked at her hands. She hasn't asked. She never asks. She just calls until I agree. He was still beside her. And you? He said. I haven't agreed, she said quietly. That's the problem. The silence that followed was the kind that changes the temperature of a room. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and set something on the chair between them. A small container, sealed, still carrying warmth. Japchae. Glass noodles with vegetables, the particular sweetness of it reaching her even through the lid. For after the meeting tomorrow, he said quietly. Eat it while it's warm. She stared at the container. She had been taking care of people for 11 years. She had shown up, held things together, kept moving. She had been competent and present and unfailingly, exhaustingly reliable. Nobody had ever packed her lunch before a hard day. She picked up the container and held it in both hands and did not trust herself to speak for a moment. I have to get back, she said finally. I know. She stood, smoothed her scrubs, reassembled herself in the practiced way she had perfected over years of not falling apart in hallways. She was almost at the door when she stopped without entirely meaning to. She didn't turn around. The meeting, she said. It's probably nothing. I know, he said. For the 3rd time, quiet and certain and completely unconvinced. She walked back to her floor with Japchae in her hands and his voice in her head, and she didn't know which one was more dangerous. The meeting lasted 22 minutes. Nori sat across from two administrators she recognized and one she didn't, in a room that smelled like recycled air and careful language, and she answered every question the way she had learned to answer difficult things, directly, without excess, without letting them see her hands. Her hands were steady. They were always steady when it mattered. The scheduling conflict was addressed, documented, noted as resolved. The administrator she didn't recognize said the words professional boundaries. Once, in the middle of a sentence about hospital policy, without looking at her directly. Nori understood what it meant and what it didn't mean yet, and she filed both away. She was back on the floor by 9:23. The japchae was in her locker. She had put it there before the meeting, carefully, the way you set something down that you don't want to think too hard about, and she retrieved it at 10:15 when the morning rush thinned and the floor found its temporary rhythm. She ate it in the break room, alone. At the table, sitting down with the door closed, it was still faintly warm. She sat with that for a moment, the fact of it, the specific care it represented, and then she put the container down and looked at the wall and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not grateful. Grateful was too small. Something closer to seen. The specific ache of being seen by someone when you had stopped expecting it. Her phone buzzed. She looked down, expecting her mother. It wasn't her mother. It was a number she didn't have saved, but she knew whose it was before she finished reading the message. How did it go? 3 words. No question mark. The way he said everything, not asking so much as simply making space for her answer. She stared at the message for a long moment. She typed, "Fine, how did you get this number?" His response came immediately. "You gave it to Deja when you covered the shift last week." She mentioned it. Nori read that twice. Then, despite everything, despite the meeting and her mother and the careful professional language still sitting in her chest, she almost smiled. "Of course she did," she typed. 3 dots appeared. Then, "Eat something real tonight, not from the vending machine." She looked at the empty japchae container in her hands. "Already did," she typed. The 3 dots appeared again and stayed longer this time. Then, "Good." Just that. 1 word and then nothing. And somehow it settled over her like the specific warmth of a thing that doesn't need to explain itself. She put her phone away and went back to work. Her mother called at noon. This time, Nori answered. Not because she was ready. She wasn't ready. But the meeting was done and the japchae was gone, and something about the morning had quietly rearranged her. She felt not stronger exactly, but less willing to keep paying the cost of avoidance. "You answered," her mother said. The surprise in her voice was brief and quickly managed. "I answered," Nori said. A pause. Then her mother, in the careful tone of a woman who had prepared for this conversation. "Your aunt needs you, Nori. The family needs you to come home and help manage things properly. You're a nurse. You understand what's required. You're a nurse, not you're her niece. Not we miss you, just the credential, the usefulness." Nori stood at the nurse's station and looked at the corridor where Mingi had stood 3 nights ago, watching her through the window, patient and certain, like she was something worth watching. "I need some time," she said. "Time." Her mother repeated the word like it was a foreign object. "Nori, your aunt doesn't have—" "I need some time," she said again, quietly, firmly, in a voice she didn't entirely recognize as her own. The silence on the other end was long and weighted. "I see," her mother said finally, in the tone that meant she saw considerably more than Nori had said, and that they would be discussing it further, and that further was coming sooner than Nori was prepared for. The call ended. Nori set her phone down on the nurse's station counter and stood very still for a moment. Down the corridor, Deja was watching her with the expression of someone who had heard exactly enough to understand exactly nothing and was desperate to ask about all of it. Nori picked up her chart. Not a word, she said. Deja turned back to her computer with the careful innocence of someone saving their questions for later. He was waiting outside the hospital when her shift ended. Not in the waiting room. Outside, leaning against a car that was dark and quiet and expensive, in the understated way of someone who had never needed to announce anything. The night air was cool and the parking lot lights cast everything in amber, and he was just there. The way he was always just there, like arriving before she did, was simply how he operated. Nori stopped on the steps. He straightened when he saw her, didn't move toward her. Just straightened the way a man does when the person he's been waiting for finally appears, and waited for her to close the distance or not. She closed it, slowly, stopping a few feet away. "You can't keep doing this," she said. "I know. Administration is all ready." "I'm not in the hospital," he said, quiet, factual. "I'm on a public street." She looked at him for a long moment. He was right, technically, and they both knew that wasn't the point, and he was looking at her, with that expression that said he knew it too, and had decided the point could wait. "How did the rest of the day go?" he said. Not a question. The same way as the text, just space made available, unhurried, no pressure attached to filling it. She looked out at the parking lot. A car passed on the street behind him. Somewhere distant, an ambulance moved through the city in the direction of somewhere else's emergency. "My mother called," she said. "I answered." He was still. "She wants me to come home, help with my aunt's care, manage things." She paused. "She said you're a nurse, like that was the whole argument." "Is it?" "It used to be." She looked at her hands. "I've been the one who shows up my entire life, for everyone. And I'm—" She stopped. The word she reached for was tired, but it felt insufficient. Too small for what she actually meant. "I told her I needed time." "That's the first time you've said that to her." "To anyone," she said. The admission surprised her on its way out. She hadn't meant to say it that broadly. But it was true, and he received it the way he received everything, without making it into more than it was, without underreacting either, just holding it steadily in the space between them. "Come," he said. She looked at him. "Where?" "You've been inside that building for 12 hours. Come." It wasn't a command exactly, it was an offering phrased with the economy of a man who didn't believe in unnecessary words. She understood the difference by now. She should have said no. She got in the car. He took her to a Korean restaurant 40 minutes from the hospital. Small, quiet, the kind of place with handwritten menus and an owner who came out of the kitchen when Mingi walked in and spoke to him in Korean with the warmth of long familiarity. Mingi responded briefly, his voice dropping into his native language with an ease that was different from how he spoke in English, less contained somehow. More himself. They were seated in a corner booth without being asked. "You come here often," she said. "My mother ate here when she first came to this country." He said it simply, looking at the menu. The owner knew her. Nori looked at him. It was the first time he had mentioned his mother. The first personal detail he had offered without being asked, and it landed quietly between them like something deliberately set down. "Is she still here?" Nori asked. "Your mother?" "No." A pause. "She went back to Korea when I was 19. We talk." Another pause, smaller. "Not enough." She absorbed this, the particular loneliness of it. A mother in another country, phone calls that were never quite sufficient. She understood that specific kind of distance even if the geography of hers was different. The food came without them fully ordering. Banchan first, small dishes appearing one by one, then sundubu jjigae, soft tofu stew, set in front of her, still bubbling faintly in its stone pot. She looked at it, then at him. "You ordered for me," she said. "You look like someone who needs something warm." He met her eyes briefly. "Tell me if you don't like it." She picked up her spoon. It was extraordinary. She didn't tell him that immediately. She sat with it for a moment, the warmth of it spreading through her chest in a way that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with being cared for so specifically, so quietly, by someone who simply paid attention. "It's good," she said finally. "I know," he said, and almost smiled. They ate in a silence that was comfortable in a way silences between them had been building toward for 2 weeks without her fully realizing it. The restaurant moved softly around them, low voices, the sound of the kitchen, the owner's radio playing something she didn't recognize, but that felt like home anyway. She looked at him across the table in the warm light of this place that held his history, and she thought about his mother eating here alone in a new country, and she thought about her own mother's voice saying, "You're a nurse," instead of "I need you. And she felt the distance between those two kinds of love like a physical thing. "Mingi," she said. The first time she had said his name out loud. He looked up. She hadn't planned what came after it. The name had simply arrived, and now it was in the air between them, and he was looking at her with an expression that was more open than she had ever seen on him. Something underneath the composure, briefly visible, like light through a door left accidentally ajar. "Thank you," she said, "for the japchae this morning." He held her gaze for a moment. "You don't have to thank me for that," he said quietly. "I know," she said. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, the words felt true. She thought about the restaurant for 3 days, not obsessively, just, it kept returning. The stone pot still bubbling when it arrived, the owner's radio, the way Mingi's voice had changed when he spoke Korean, dropping into something she didn't have a word for, but recognized as real in the way people are real when they forget to manage themselves. And his name in her mouth, the way it had come out before she decided to say it. She thought about that most of all. He texted on Sunday. Not food this time. Just, "Are you working tonight?" She was sitting on her couch in the specific stillness of a day off, unwashed dishes she hadn't gotten to, laundry folded but not put away, the particular entropy of a woman who spent all her energy elsewhere and had none left for her own space. She looked at the message for a moment. "No," she typed. "First day off in 9 days, 3 dots, then go outside, even for 20 minutes. She almost typed, "I'm fine." She stopped, herself. "I'm sitting down," she typed instead. "That counts." A pause. Then, "It doesn't." She smiled at her phone in the empty apartment, then immediately felt self-conscious about smiling at her phone in her empty apartment and set it face down on the cushion beside her. It buzzed again almost immediately. "There's a market 2 blocks from your hospital, Sunday afternoons. Go." She picked the phone back up. "How do you know where I live?" The response took longer this time. Then, "I don't. I know where you work. The market is near there." She read that twice. It was probably true. It was also the kind of answer that was technically accurate and deliberately incomplete, and she was beginning to understand that this was how he operated. He gave her the true thing and let her decide how much of the rest she wanted to know. She went to the market. It was the kind of Sunday market that appeared in warm weather and smelled like kettle corn and cut flowers, vendors in rows, families with strollers, an old man playing saxophone near the entrance with a case open at his feet. Nori moved through it slowly, without purpose, which was itself unusual enough to feel like something. She didn't have his number pulled up. She wasn't looking for him. She found him anyway. Or he found her. She was never entirely sure afterward which it was. She turned from a flower stall with a bunch of sunflowers she'd bought without planning to, and he was there, not close. 20 feet away, near a produce vendor, watching her with an expression that was quiet and certain and not remotely surprised. "You came," he said when she reached him. "You knew I would." "I hoped," he said, which was different, and they both knew it. She looked at him in daylight for the first time. The ER and the waiting room at the restaurant had all been artificial light, fluorescent or amber or candlelit. And here in the flat honesty of a Sunday afternoon, he looked different. Not less, just present in a way that had nowhere to hide, and he wasn't trying to hide anything. Neither, she realized, was she. They walked without deciding to walk, moving through the market in the unhurried way of people with nowhere specific to be. He bought her a coffee from a vendor without asking, oat milk, the right amount of sweet, and she didn't ask how he knew, because she was beginning to understand that he simply paid attention in the way some people breathed, without effort, without end. "My mother called again," she said. "What did she say?" "She's coming to the city, next weekend." She kept her eyes forward. "She wants to talk in person." He was quiet for a moment. "Are you ready for that?" "No." Simple, true. But she's coming anyway. They walked a few more steps in silence. "She'll want to see where I am," Nori said. "What my life looks like, whether I've made a decision about my aunt." She paused. "She'll have opinions about other things too," she didn't say you. She didn't need to. He stopped walking. She stopped too, turning to look at him. In the middle of the market, with the saxophone drifting from the entrance and families moving around them like water around stones, he looked at her with the full weight of his attention, which was, she had learned, considerable. "What do you want to do?" he said. Not what are you going to do? Not what does she want? What did she want? The question landed in a place that had been empty for so long she felt the echo of it. "I don't know yet," she said. He nodded, accepting it completely, without pushing, without filling the space with reassurance she hadn't asked for. They started walking again. She was still holding the sunflowers. At some point, she couldn't have said when, they had shifted from one arm to the other and his hand had found the small of her back. Not guiding, not possessive, just there. Present in the same way he was always present, steady and unhurried, like he had decided some time ago that this was where his hand belonged and was simply waiting for the rest of the world to catch up. She didn't move away. They walked like that until the market thinned and the saxophone faded and the Sunday afternoon began its slow turn toward evening, and she thought, not for the first time and not for the last, that this was what it felt like to be held without being asked to be smaller. She wasn't sure she knew what to do with that yet, but she was starting to want to find out. She asked him on Tuesday, not planned. They were sitting in his car outside the hospital after her shift. He had started doing this, appearing at the end of her evenings with the quiet regularity of someone who had decided this was simply part of his schedule now. And she had been turning the question over for days and was tired of turning it. "Tell me what you are," she said. He didn't pretend not to understand. He looked straight ahead through the windshield at the parking lot and the amber lights and the ordinary Tuesday night moving around them, and he was quiet for long enough that she knew he was deciding not whether to answer, but how. "I run things," he said finally. "Organizations, operations." A pause. "The kind that don't have websites." She looked at his profile. "The kind that hurt people." He was still for a moment. "The kind that protects people, mostly?" Another pause, smaller. "Not always." The honesty of the qualification landed harder than a denial would. Have. She had expected him to minimize. He hadn't. "My father built it," he continued. "In Korea, then here. I inherited it the way you inherit anything from a man like that, without being asked." He glanced at her briefly. "I've made choices inside it. I'm not without responsibility for what it is." Nori looked at her hands in her lap. "Has anyone been hurt?" she said. "Because of you, specifically?" A long pause. "Yes," he said. The words sat between them. He didn't qualify it, or contextualize it, or ask her to understand it. He just let it exist, the way he let difficult things exist, without managing her reaction to them. She thought about the waiting room, the soup, the japchae before her hard morning, his hand at the small of her back at the market, steady and unhurried. She thought about, do you want me to stop coming, and someone should know that's happening, and the way he said, I know, like it meant something precise every single time. She thought about all the ways a person could be more than one thing. My mother is coming Saturday, she said. I know. She's going to want answers I don't have yet. She turned to look at him fully. About my aunt. About... She stopped. About this. He turned to look at her too. In the dim light of the parking lot, he looked exactly like what he was. A man who had lived in complicated spaces for a long time and had stopped apologizing for it. And also, underneath that, something she was only beginning to have language for. Something that had been sitting in waiting rooms and packing lunches and placing a hand at the small of her back with the patience of someone who had decided she was worth every bit of the waiting. What do you want to tell her? He said. What do you want? Always that, always her. I don't know yet, she said. But I'm not. She stopped, started again. I'm not ashamed of this, whatever this is. She held his gaze. I want you to know that. Something moved across his face. Not the subtle, contained shift she had learned to read over the past 3 weeks. Something more open than that. Something that briefly and completely undid the composure she had always assumed was simply who he was. Nori, he said. Just her name. Low and even and carrying everything he hadn't said yet. She felt it land in the center of her chest. She's going to come to the hospital, she said, looking away first because she needed to. She won't come to my apartment. She'll want to see me on my ground, where she thinks I'm most likely to listen. She shook her head slightly. That's how she operates. He absorbed this in silence. She'll bring my aunt into it, Nori continued. She'll make it about family obligation and duty and what I owe. Her voice was steady, but she could feel the tiredness beneath it, old and deep and specifically shaped by years of this particular dynamic. And the thing is, I love my aunt. I do. It's not that I don't want to help, it's that nobody asked if I wanted to. They just decided. Like they've always decided, he said quietly. She looked at him. You've been the one who shows up, he said. So they stopped asking and started expecting. He paused. That's not love, that's habit. The accuracy of it moved through her slowly. Yeah, she said, barely above a whisper. They sat in the quiet of the car for a moment. Outside, an ambulance moved through the distant street, lights but no siren, unhurried. The city doing its ordinary work around the edges of something that felt anything but ordinary. His hand moved from the steering wheel to the console between them, not reaching for her, just open, present, available if she wanted it. She looked at it for a moment, then she placed her hand over his. Neither of them spoke. The parking lot hummed around them. Somewhere above the amber lights, the sky had gone the particular dark blue of a city night that never gets fully black, and she sat with her hand over his and felt something she hadn't felt in so long she'd forgotten it had a name. Safe. Not because his world was safe. It wasn't, and they both knew it. But because he was. With her, in this car, in this parking lot, he was the safest thing she had touched in years. Her phone buzzed on her knee. She turned it over without moving her hand from his. Her mother. A text this time, not a call. I'll be there Saturday. The hospital, 10 o'clock. We need to talk properly, Nori. It's time. She read it twice. Then she set the phone face down again. Mingi said nothing, but his hand turned slowly beneath hers until his fingers found hers and held them, steady, certain, unhurried, the way he did everything that actually mattered. Saturday was 4 days away. Saturday came the way hard things always came, preceded by 4 days of ordinary life that felt borrowed. Nori worked Thursday and Friday on autopilot, which was to say she worked well, because autopilot for her was still better than most people's best. She answered her charts. She covered her patients. She ate at actual mealtimes sitting down, and noticed herself doing it the way you notice a new habit before it becomes invisible. Mingi texted each morning. Nothing elaborate. Eat something before your shift. Once, a photograph of doenjang jjigae from a restaurant she didn't recognize with the caption, "Better than the hospital vending machine." She had looked at that photograph for longer than was strictly necessary. She didn't tell him what time her mother was coming. She didn't need to. She had learned by now that he had his own ways of knowing the things that mattered, and that he used that knowledge carefully without wielding it. Saturday morning. She woke early and lay in bed for a while looking at the ceiling. She thought about her aunt, genuinely, without the guilt her mother had threaded through every call. Her aunt had been kind to her, had shown up to things, had laughed at her jokes when no one else bothered. She deserved help, real help, arranged properly and with dignity. What she didn't deserve was to be used as leverage. She thought about Mingi's hand turning beneath hers in the parking lot. She got up, made coffee, put on her scrubs. Her mother arrived at 10 o'clock exactly. Nori was at the nurse's station when she saw them appear at the end of the corridor. Her mother and Aunt Cecil, who was not the sick aunt, but the organizational one, the one her mother brought to things that required witnesses. They moved through the hospital with the careful authority of women who believed that bearing communicated credibility. Her mother was dressed like she was going to church. This was deliberate. Nori set her chart down and walked toward them. She met them in the corridor outside the ER bay, on her floor, her ground, and she felt the ground hold. Nori. Her mother's eyes moved over her with the particular efficiency of a woman cataloguing information. "You look tired." "I'm working," Nori said. "We won't take long." Her mother's tone was the one that meant the opposite. "We just need to talk about your aunt, about the plan. You've had time to think, and we need to—" "I have thought about it," Nori said. "I'm going to help with her care. I'll coordinate her appointments and I'll find her a qualified home nurse for the daily things. I'll pay for it." She kept her voice even. "But I won't be moving back, and I won't be doing this because it was decided for me. I'm doing it because I love her." Her mother's expression shifted, not softened, recalculated. "That's not what the family—" "That's what I'm offering," Nori said. "It's a good offer." The silence between them had weight. Aunt Cecile looked at the floor with the practiced neutrality of a woman who had been brought along for support and was reconsidering the assignment. Her mother drew herself up. "This is about that man," she said. Quiet, precise. The tone that meant she had been waiting to arrive here all along, and the aunt was handled, and now they were getting to the point. "I've heard things, Nori, about who he is, what he's involved in." Her eyes were steady and certain. "You're a nurse. You've worked for everything you have. You cannot afford to be connected to someone like—" She stopped. Not because Nori had spoken, because the air in the corridor had changed. Nori felt it before she turned, the particular quality of his presence, the way spaces arranged themselves differently when he was in them. She turned and he was there, 20 feet down the corridor, walking toward them with the unhurried certainty of a man who had decided some time ago where he was going and saw no reason to rush. He was dressed simply. He looked like himself. He stopped just behind Nori's left shoulder, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, far enough that he was giving her the space to handle her own ground. Her mother looked at him the way people looked at him when they understood, instinctively and immediately, that he was not someone to be managed. "Mrs. Williamson," he said. Quiet, courteous, completely immovable. Her mother's eyes moved between them. Something shifted in her expression, the recalculation happening again, faster this time. She took one step forward with the bearing of a woman who had raised her daughter and believed that still counted for something and always would. "Nori," she said, "step away from that door and come speak to me properly." Nori didn't move. She was so far past brave by then that she'd come out the other side into something quieter. She stood in the corridor of her own ER, her floor, her department, the one place that had never asked her to be anything other than exactly what she was. And she looked at her mother and felt the ground hold steady beneath her feet. Mingi didn't turn around. He just spoke. Low, even, the way he said everything that actually mattered. "Don't touch my wife." 4 words. Her mother went completely still. Aunt Cecile made a sound that wasn't quite a word. And Nori, who had been holding herself together with discipline and habit and the exhaustion of a woman who had been strong so long she forgot it was a choice, felt something in her chest come loose. Not break. Come loose. The way a knot releases when the right amount of pressure is finally applied from the right direction. He still hadn't turned around. He didn't need to. She looked at the back of his head. This man who had sat in uncomfortable chairs and packed her lunch before hard days and told her the truth when she asked for it and turned his hand beneath hers in a dark parking lot. And she felt the full weight of what he had just done. He had not asked her first. He had not needed to. Wife. She stepped forward until she was beside him, close enough that their arms touched, and she looked at her mother across the small charged distance of the corridor. "I'll call you about Aunt Patricia's appointments," she said. Steady, certain, in a voice that had found, somewhere in the last 3 weeks, a new register, quieter than before and somehow more sure. "I meant what I said. I'll help. But this part of my life is mine." Her mother looked at her for a long moment, then at Mingi, then back at her daughter with an expression that was complicated and human and not entirely without love. Just love that had always come attached to conditions, encountering for the first time a daughter who had stopped accepting them. She didn't speak. She turned and Aunt Cecile turned with her, and they walked back down the corridor the way they had come. With bearing, with composure, with the particular dignity of women who had not gotten what they came for and were not yet ready to decide what that meant. Nori watched them go. The corridor was quiet. Mingi turned around. He looked at her the way he had looked at her from the first night, like she was something worth noticing, worth watching, worth every bit of the waiting, and said nothing because there was nothing that needed saying. She looked up at him. "You called me your wife," she said. "Yes," he said. "You didn't ask." "No," he said, and waited with the specific patience of a man who had already decided and was giving her the space to catch up. She looked at him for a long moment. This complicated, careful, quietly devoted man who had walked into her ER 3 weeks ago and simply refused to stop paying attention. "Okay," she said. Just that. One word, carrying everything she hadn't said yet and everything she was learning, slowly and for the first time, too. Face, gentle and deliberate and unhurried face, gentle and deliberate and unhurried. And she stood in the corridor of her own ER and let herself be held by it. Outside the hospital windows, the city moved in its ordinary way. Inside, Nori Williamson stood beside a man who had noticed she wasn't eating and packed her lunch before hard days and placed himself between her and everything that had ever made her feel unchoosable. And she thought that this was what it felt like when someone chose you first. Not after, not instead. First. And we've come to the end of it. Thank you for listening all the way through. If you enjoyed the story, a like and comment is appreciated.